Hello and welcome to HERstory, a program that honors and tells the stories of women that have served this nation past and present. I'm Phyllis Wilson, the president of the Military Women's Memorial Foundation and a retired Army Chief Warrant Officer 5. Today, we are joined by U.S. Air Force veteran Dr. Mylène Huynh. Dr. Winn is a board-certified family practice and preventive medicine physician with over 20 years experience in integrative health and medical acupuncture. Dr. Wynn's passion is health and healing with a life mission to promote healthier communities. She completed a 21-year U.S. Air Force career as a flight surgeon, a family medicine academic faculty member, a clinic director, and a consultant to the U.S. Air Force Surgeon General on preventive medicine and global health. Dr. Huynh, welcome to HERstory.
Thank you, Phyllis, and it's truly an honor for me to be here with you.
Well, thank you. It's tremendous. I'm a registered nurse, so to have a doctor in the house, we feel really excited to have you here today. So let's start back with your childhood. That's where we're going to begin this story. You were born at the height of the war in Vietnam. Your father was an South Vietnamese Army physician, and your mother was a pharmacist. You sometimes accompanied your dad on weekend rounds to visit his patients, right? In a military hospital. So tell us a little bit about your childhood experience and how that influenced your eventual choice to join the military.
Yes, Phyllis, I was born in Saigon, Vietnam on Lunar New Year's Eve, and my mom tells me that she was alone in the hospital when I was born because my dad was away deployed, like many military families today, right? But I was so fortunate to be born in a very loving family despite the chaos of war. I grew up in Nha Trang, which is a coastal town north of Saigon, known for its beautiful beaches. My mom opened a pharmacy store, if you will. Her pharmacy was located right in our home, our grandparents' home where we lived. And it was very common in Vietnam then to have a business in the front and then you live in the back or upstairs. And I remember watching my mom, selling medicine to her customer and what she would tell them and advise them. And then when my dad would come home, he would go visit patients in the hospital and I would sometimes accompany him. And I saw at a very young age that the battlefield comes home through the suffering and the wound that all men and women in uniform bear, both psychologically and emotionally. One of my favorite childhood memory from Vietnam as a young child involving a U.S. military member actually was when I was with my mom in a market, and I think I was about 5 then, and I got lost. Somehow we got separated, my mom and I, and there was I think it was a U.S. Marine. I don't know why I thought it was a Marine, but maybe his uniform. And he stood there with me, waiting just there until my mom returned. I think at some point he saw that I was really nervous and scared, this military member just staying by my side, and even reach out his pocket and pull out his last gum and share that with me. And so I always had a positive impression of the U.S. military growing up in Vietnam. And also at a very early age, Phyllis, because we lived with my grandparents, and my grandfather loved to compose poetry, and he would compose poems about freedom, about patriotism, and about peace. And I think those kind of memories left a lasting impression in me.
I cannot imagine what all of that was like. And so after the war ended in Vietnam, you went back to your school and found that some of your classmates and some of their family members did not survive through that war. And your father was then forced into a re-education camp, a glamorous word for not a nice place, sadly. So that post-war time for you must have been, I can't imagine what it would have felt like. And if you would talk a little bit about what it was like when you returned back to your school, and then ultimately, after your father came out of the re-education camp, how did you finally depart Vietnam?
Yeah, so it was really difficult after the war ended on April 30th, 1975, and that was 46 years ago, and I still remember it today, where the South lost to the communist North, and the U.S. had pulled out 2 years prior in 1973, and our lives changed significantly. So according to the Communist Party, my dad had 3 strikes against him. He served as a South Vietnamese officer with the U.S. military. He was educated as a physician. That means he helped other people. And then he also served as elected office at city council. So we were told if he just turned himself in, that he would just be gone for several weeks. But, months would go by and we would not hear from him. I went back to school quickly. Our uniform changed. We wore white dresses as girls and wear these red scarves that represent, we're part of the Communist Party. And we would learn songs about communism and sing them. And there was this really eerie, strange feeling, in classrooms where at young children, we were told that we need to report things to our teachers if there were things happening at home that was against the communist teaching. It was very authoritarian, and also wealth was controlled. There was I remember my mom scrambling because they had a series of currency exchange where 500 dong was what we call the currency in Vietnam, became 1 dong. So really control how much wealth each family would have. There was a ration of food. Each family could only purchase a certain amount of rice or meat based on the number of members that had been reported to live in that household. I remember for a period of time where we didn't even have toothpaste. We would brush our teeth with the straw that came from the woods that we would use to cook our rice. And, feeling hungry at times, going to bed hungry because there was not enough food. And also as the months approach, my mom realized that, she needed to go find my dad because we haven't heard from him. She, my grandmother, went looking for him and found him at a, we call him like concentration camp, essentially. And because my dad had served with the U.S. military, his children, my siblings and I, would not have had the opportunity for higher education, that we would be like common laborers in the, if we stay in Vietnam. So my mom knew that we have to leave, that we have to escape. She worked with, let me rephrase this. I get emotional, so let me wipe my nose. It's funny how when I tell these stories, all that emotion still come back. Like, oh my gosh, that's the trauma. But anyway, so she worked with friends. Let me see how this goes. Okay, so she collaborated with her friends to purchase fishing boats because we live in the coastal town, fishing village in Vietnam. And she bought fishing boats and with her friends and had my uncles learn to be fishermen. The Communist Party really encouraged that we be self-sufficient, become farmers and fishermen and so on. That education wasn't valued. So she did that. And about a year after the war ended, in June 1976, my dad was out on probation and our family basically escaped. We crept out of our home early one morning, got on the fishing boat, and 6 nights later arrived in the Philippines, in Manila, Philippines, and sought refugee there. My dad had an old army compass, handheld compass, and we used that as our guide on the boat, and we just headed east. We're very lucky to have arrived safely, 23 of us, to the Philippines.
So you made it to the Philippines, and then you ultimately ended up in Northern Virginia. How did you do that?
Yeah, so we stayed in the refugee camp for 2 months, and we were sponsored by my parents' friends and a Lutheran church. A church sponsored our family of 6 to Dale City, Virginia.
So now you're in the United States, and as you continue to grow and become a young woman, what was it that about this country or about your father's service, the things you had already witnessed that caused you to say, I want to serve in the military?
I think I always love, Phyllis, I always love helping others, and I enjoy getting to know other people. I have a curious mind and love medicine, and I love the combination of art and science. I guess you could say that my decision to become a military physician was shaped by being born in a country in the middle of a war and being blessed with a mind for science and a heart for service from my parents, and a positive impression for U.S. military through a young Marine.
So you know we're all sisters in service, but I'm Army and you went Air Force, and I just have to ask the question, why specifically, what was it about the Air Force that called to you that made you decide that was the right service for you to follow?
In college, I did the Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps because I had friends in Air Force ROTC, and they are still one of my closest friends. And I was inspired by friends, other women who I thought was just the most beautiful people, and these beautiful heart of service. And I thought if they could do it, I could do it too.
And you certainly did, serving and then ultimately retiring from the Air Force. One of the things here at the Military Women's Memorial I wanted to share about is we recently opened an incredible exhibit that honors the diversity of America's servicewomen called The Color of Freedom. And in particular, we highlight women of color in this. So talk to me a little bit, if you don't mind, about what it's like to serve in the United States military as both a woman and certainly as an Asian American woman.
So Phyllis, I actually felt my colleagues in the military treated me as equal, in that it was more important what I bring to the fight than the fact that I'm 5'2", petite, or my skin color. I always felt that they treated me equal, and I really appreciate how our U.S. military emphasized that. For example, I was overseas in Africa. I was in Africa as a commanding officer for a humanitarian and also an exchange mission with other militaries in the Africa continent. And when we arrived, the other military members automatically go to like the tallest person, the biggest person, and start talking to them as if they're the commanding officer. And I love that my colleague would say, no, she is the commanding officer. And they always are so surprised because I'm, petite and Asian. So I really love that military do values diversity, and that we all can contribute equally, and we demonstrate that when we are overseas to other military members.
I couldn't agree more. I've been to so many places too, and when I walk around, they, especially if I'm in civilian attire, they don't even for a second imagine I must be a tourist, certainly not a military officer. So I hear you on that. So when you reflect back on your time, your 21 years in the Air Force, what would you say the accomplishments you'd want to share that you're most proud of having done in that great career you had as a physician?
So Phyllis, as you know, I know you do this too, that we were taught that, wherever we go, we leave it a little better. We've all done that, try to leave it a little better. But I would say the proudest thing would be to I guess two things, is to promote health as a security issue. When I was serving as an international health specialist with the U.S. Air Force and working with other militaries, we did pandemic planning, highlighting to other military leaders that health actually has a huge role in our security, and we're seeing that play out during the pandemic currently. And the other thing I'm proud of is the emphasis and the work I've done in forced health protection and prevention, and really helping our men and women stay healthy, not just to get the diseases and then be treated, but stay as healthy and as resilient as they can. I guess I'm really proud of the fact that I got to be a trusted physician for America's heroes. I'm a trusted physician for America heroes. I always tell my children, I have the coolest job in the world. I'm a physician of America.
See, I thought I had the coolest job. Wait a minute now. There's some great jobs out there, certainly in the military. As you were talking about pandemics, epidemics, and so forth, let's talk about vaccines for a moment. Certainly as a physician, you've seen a lot of news with regards to the coronavirus. And I'm sure you've given a lot of vaccinations. I was an immunization nurse at one time, so giving everything from tiny babies all the way up through all age groups their vaccines. And can you talk a little bit about your experience with certainly preventative health, why vaccines are important, and in the current environment? Can you share a little bit about your insight?
Yes. So Phyllis, diseases, as we know, do not occur randomly. There's an interplay between the host, which is in this case during the pandemic is us, the environment that we are in, and the agent, which is SARS-CoV-2. So while vaccine has a role in prevention, I think what's even more important is us individually, the host factor. What we do, what we eat. So I often tell my patients that, I always ask, where is the defense, the headquarters for defense in your body, right? So for the United States, the headquarters for our defense is, of course, the Pentagon. But in our body, where is that? So it's actually our gut, our GI tract, because 70% of our immune system sits in our gut. So when we are facing a pandemic, we have to protect our headquarters, and it starts by eating healthy foods. Mostly plants, lots of color, eat the rainbow, and then doing things like getting enough sleep, managing our stress, and getting enough exercise are so critical for our resilience. I was fortunate to be working with a task force resilience, early on at the start of the pandemic, and the task force created information that we share with our patients. We talk often about PPE, which is personal protective equipment, or masks and gloves. We also want to emphasize PPN and PPL. PPN is personal protective nutrition, and PPL is personal protective lifestyle. So I like to say, don't forget your PPN and PPL in addition to your PPE. And this is where I want to highlight and give a shout out to the Human Performance Resource by CHAMP, which is under the Uniformed Services University, and they have incredible resources on resilience.
You're so right. We all know that there are key things to our personal health, which is certainly get enough sleep, eat right, get a reasonable amount of exercise. Those three things can make such a difference for us all. And while we academically know it, look how many of us, we always say we'll do it tomorrow, or I'll start my eating better next week, and we continue to push that off to our own detriment. So as two clinicians here, I'm with you on that one. Now that you're out of the military, and as I was reading your story, I've got to tell you, I was bowled over at how this circle continues. When your father came over here as a physician from Vietnam, the building that you now work in is the same building that he first worked in. How did that happen? Explain that to me.
Yeah, so my last assignment in the Air Force, I work at the Air Force SG office, which it's now the Defense Health Agency located in Falls Church, Virginia. It's a mile from where I grew up. And the office space that he had is what I am currently using. It's actually 2 doors down because it's a community that I know and love. And I wanted to be here to offer services to our community to promote health and resilience and emphasizing prevention as part of the healthcare, and also to help others reverse chronic diseases.
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to your dad, as you spoke earlier, your dad being the physician, but your mom being a pharmacist, and you watched and witnessed from the time you were a small child of how she administered out and taught, did that pharmacy teaching of how to take those medicines or those drugs as they were prescribed to comply with that to feel better. And so you watched it on both sides, your mom and your dad. How did that exposure to the world of medicine from your entire life influence your determination to stick with holistic medicine as being more important, or at least equally as important to what we call Western medicine, which is really, it seems to me, less preventative and more reactive to issues that have already occurred?
My parents are grounded in science and medicine, but it also starts at home, Phyllis. We eat very healthy, that every meal we have 3 different vegetables. We eat as a family. I grew up that way where, vegetable is really the center of our meals, and my parents, as they got older, had health challenges, and the first thing they did was change their diet and increase more exercise. And I saw how they themselves reverse chronic diseases. When I was in high school, I worked in my dad's medical practice as a receptionist. And so when my dad came to the United States, he had to do his medical licensing and residency again in order to practice. And one thing he added to his practice was acupuncture. He went and learned to do acupuncture here in the United States. He actually went to New York to do that. And he would say that, when we asked him why acupuncture, you're in the US now. He said that in the battlefield in Vietnam, he felt that the acupuncturist could do more for his troops to alleviate pain and suffering than he could as a MD, a medical doctor. So that's why he incorporated acupuncture. And so when I work in his office as a receptionist, I would watch people walk in pain, sometimes with a cane or a walker, and they would leave forgetting their cane and walker. They would be so pain-free. And it's funny because I forgot all about that going through medical school, because we never talk about acupuncture. It was my first assignment as a family doc at Pope Air Force Base, where I also cross-covered and helped in the flight medicine clinic. And the air crew would always ask me, don't you have anything else beside pills for pain, right? I've done physical therapy, I don't want the pills, don't you have anything else? Because back then, the Air Force did not have a fly-safe medication list, that any medication I prescribed, whether it's Motrin or Tylenol, they would be grounded, they couldn't fly, they would be denif. So those questions kept coming at me, don't you have anything else? And then I remember, gosh, of course, acupuncture. So I went and got additional training in acupuncture, and this was back in 1996, so it's been 25 years, and that I started to practice acupuncture in a MTF, a military treatment facility.
I wish I had known you were at Pope in the mid-90s. I was there at Fort Bragg, which is adjacent to it, although I only went to Pope Air Force Base, honestly, to jump out of airplanes. But I wanted to know for a fact that those Air Force flyers were safe to fly. So thank you for doing what you did with the acupuncture piece. So as we get ready to close out HERstory, Dr. Winn, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what you think you have done to make a difference, certainly to the military, but talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about the American dream, and is it still out there for people to chase?
Yeah, I think that being a physician in the military and being able to serve men and women who willing to sacrifice their lives for freedom in our country is like the greatest honor. To make sure they know I have their back. And I learned that from working with other nations' militaries as we help other nations, especially my work was mostly in the Asia Pacific. We often ask them, why is it important for you to have good medical system? And they say that, all men and women would not fight or go out to the battlefield if they did not know that they got medical on their, supporting them, that they can count on us to be there for them. And I am just so proud of the fact that I got that opportunity to serve the men and women who I consider my brothers and sisters, who serve men and women in uniform. That's the proudest thing. And second is the things I learned while serving. I love the Air Force core value of integrity, service, and excellence, and that's what I incorporate into my medical practice. That those are something, core values, long-lasting. They don't change. The Air Force have changed many things, but we've not changed our core values, which I love. And recognizing that prevention is really important in health, and science is there for us now to help our patient reverse chronic diseases, and we should implement that. And the whole aspects of whole health. So the VA has a whole health program, which is an aspirational model. We start with life's purpose. What is it that our patient want to achieve in this lifetime? And aligning their health objective and goals to achieving their health purpose. I think the American dreams is definitely, like you said, Phyllis, truly there, still real. And it starts with knowing why is it that we're here on earth at this time, and taking steps to truly carry out our purpose. I often tell my patient that, I want you to, get healthier so that you can do what you're here to do, your life purpose, because if you're not doing that part, then we're all missing out, because we all have a role here on earth.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you're incredibly healthy so you continue to serve following your time in the Air Force. And so Dr. Winn, thank you so much for taking time today to share your story on the Military Women's Memorial's HERstory program. Thank you so very much.